Our scripture for today comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Do we have any volunteers to read the chapter? Anyone? Cece, you want to read it? You do that? Excellent.
If I speak in the tongue of men and of angels, but have not love, I am only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and surrender my body to the flame, but have not love, I gain nothing. Love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it is not rude, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. Love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away, for we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, an imperfect disappears. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child, When I became a man, I put childish ways behind me. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror, then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. And now these three remain: faith, and hope, and love. But the greatest of these is love.
Thank you. Word of the Lord. Anybody that's spent any time around me in the last 4 weeks knows that I love to brag about my boys. I love to talk about them all the time. And last Saturday, my son Noah had his 5th birthday. And it seemed like just yesterday that we brought him home from the hospital, and it was a really frightening day. He was just a little tiny guy, and he couldn't do anything on his own. He couldn't eat on his own, he couldn't clean himself, and he couldn't comfort himself in any way. And I know he couldn't comfort himself because he was constantly crying. And so for 9 months, Noah had been in the womb of his mother, my wife Gail. And she was constantly with him. He could hear her heartbeat all the time. He could hear her voice. And her heartbeat was a soothing rhythm for him. So when he wasn't comforted and he heard Gail's heartbeat, it would calm him when she was rocking him to sleep or when she was feeding him. And as wonderful as Mommy's heartbeat was at that time, he didn't really know Gail at all. He didn't know, while he was in the womb, what color her eyes were. He didn't know how long her hair was or the texture of it. And even if he did know what her eyes looked like and what her hair looked like, he wouldn't be able to categorize them. He wouldn't be able to associate that, oh, she sees with her eyes. And her hair looks differently because she fixed it differently today. So all of her outward features, her physical features, would have been a total mystery to Noah while he was in his womb. And after his birth, it would take him a long time to even understand what those physical features are. Everything to him at that moment in the womb must have been very abstract. I don't know if kids can imagine things while they're in the womb, but if Noah could imagine something while he was in the womb, I think he would be trying to imagine what his mother looked like. And his imagination, not having been exposed to much, would be very limited to the things he had experienced, right? His experiences within the womb. So he had very limited sensibility and very little ability to understand what mom might look like, even if he knew what she looked like. And in our passage today, Paul is talking about the church's lack of ability to understand who God is. He uses the metaphor of thinking like a child to describe how the church thinks about God. The church in Corinth had been given gifts by God to help them discern who He is. What is God's character like? What is God's plan for His people? What is He able to do? Is He good? Is He just? What does this mean? And while these gifts were useful for the church in helping them understand who God is, they weren't perfectly clear. They don't have a perfectly clear picture of who God is. And the church was and still is very much a child in her mommy's tummy. We feel warm and cared for by God, even though things are not always perfect. But we only know so much about God. We're still developing in our understanding. So the scriptures are full of language that helps us understand who God is. It helps us categorize. It helps us relate the supreme being, the creator of the universe, to our limited experience. And so the language of the scripture is extremely useful, but it's not precise in a literal sense. Some examples would be like Genesis chapter 2, verse 2, where the scriptures say that by the seventh day God had finished the work He had been doing. So on the seventh day He rested from His work. Resting seems to imply a need for rest, as if God was exhausted from the work of creation and couldn't do any more, and just decided that it was time to kick back and put His feet up and relax. But we know that's not the case. We know our God doesn't get tired like that. So what's that talking about right there? It's talking about God taking a break from the work of creation, meaning that He ceased it. Scripture also tells us in Exodus 20, verse 5, that God is a jealous God. Well, what does that mean? Is God jealous like a girl's jealous of her, another girl and her boyfriend? Is it jealous like, I want that guy's car right there? I don't think God's jealous like that at all. The jealousy of God in that scripture is talking about God's desire for Him to receive the glory for His perfect, infinite goodness. Everything else in comparison to God is not worthy of that respect, that love. And so when God sees that, when we do that, it's an error. In the New Testament, we read that God is our Father. But the last time I checked my birth certificate, it said that Orrin Hansen was my father, not God. So what does that mean? What does it mean that God's my Father? And besides that, isn't Jesus God's only Son? Well, if Jesus is God's only Son, how can I be God's Son also? That makes no sense. But we know that when the Bible is speaking about God as being our Father, it's not